Here with Mike, his trusty sidekick Freddie. Tuesday talk, what is this? It's Tuesday tips on writing or something like that.
I'd like to talk about how research affects the path of your story. When you start a story about a certain theme, sometimes it's just an idea. And you start making notes toward the idea. And at a certain point, the notes accumulate to what I call a critical mass from which you can see the whole story, and then you do an outline. But no matter how detailed that outline is, invariably you're going to veer away because you're going to do research into the story. And when you research things, you find stuff you never knew before that helps shape the story. A couple years ago, a guy commissioned me to write a novel about a nonprofit he's starting. The nonprofit is called Seawolves. Seawolf principles are for all young men because the environment young men grow up in today is so toxic. The Seawolf goal is for each young man to figure out how to reach their full potential while forming bonds of brotherhood with other men. This really came through in this novel. I think we can do this via a simple construct. The fellow hired me to write a novel about seawolves, and he gave me a very detailed outline. I mean, it was over several thousand words outlining the characters and the situation. And the premise was that he would teach young men to become men by teaching them how to sail. So I set out to write a novel to illustrate those principles using the characters he created. It starts in Bayfield, Wisconsin, which is where my friend keeps his sailboat. And it's about these three boys who all come from fatherless homes who meet for the first time in Bayfield and start hanging out. As the story progressed, Matt, who was my patron, had certain ideas he wanted to incorporate, such as the discovery of hidden Indian scrolls on the outer islands. I don't know if you're familiar with northwest Wisconsin. It borders Lake Superior, and there's a number of islands up there, a lot of islands. And the furthest islands were inhabited by Indians many years ago, and legend says that they left scrolls behind. I didn't think that was realistic. So I had the boys explore the island and trip over a half-buried briefcase, and when they opened it, they found it had been left there 40 years ago by a Vietnam veteran who disappeared without a trace. And the briefcase contained letters to his family apologizing for what he was about to do, and a sapphire, a rare sapphire that he hoped they would find. Now, why didn't he just give them the sapphire? Because he was obviously suffering from serious mental problems. And when he was never seen again, they assumed that he committed suicide, which is what he did. He was not in his right mind. But the boys took the letter and the sapphire and determined to return it to his family, which led me to research sapphires in Vietnam. It turns out that Vietnam is a major source of sapphires. Freddie, we need you over here. But who found the sapphires? The sapphires were found by a French colony at the turn of the century who took over a large swatch of Vietnam for their personal reasons and enslaved the people, which led the boys to wonder, well, would it be proper to return this stone to the French who owned that property? No, it would not. For one thing, the descendants of that family had nothing to do with the plantation, but more importantly, the plantation exploited the Vietnamese people. So they figured it would be proper to return the stone to the Vietnamese people, but they didn't want to give it to the Chinese, to the communist government. So they started looking at Buddhist temples, and they made contact with a Buddhist temple, and they started doing Zoom calls with the Buddhist temple, offering to return the sapphire to them, because if you can't trust a Buddhist, who can you trust? And during the course of one of their Zoom meetings with the monk, Vietnamese troops invaded the temple, threw the monk to the ground, and said, "This conversation is over." And that became an important part of the book. Other novels I've illustrated have taken surprising turns because of the research I did, such as Biker, a biker novel I did about Josh infiltrating a paramilitary biker gang that deals in guns and drugs. And his trip took him to Paraguay. So I researched Paraguay. I looked at the jungle. I looked at what Paraguay produces. And the reason he went to Paraguay is because they were connected with a white supremacist group there. And when I did all this research on Paraguay, it affected the story. And this happens to virtually every story I write. I was recently commissioned by a patron to do a graphic novel called Marine One. The fellow provided me a lot of notes. And the notes were just his muse rambling about events he'd like to see take place in the novel. Forrest graduates West Point to be enlisted in the Gulf War as an infantryman. Forrest spends time with his family, also girlfriend, before he has to leave to Iraq in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks display how Forrest has been away for 2 years by speaking to Luigi, owner of Macron Pizza. Forrest is now in Iraq as a Marine Gulf War vet, sees combat as an infantryman. Forrest volunteers out to another tour in Baghdad during Operation Desert Shield. And this goes on for like 8 pages. So as you can see, it's kind of formless. It was up to me to give form to this narrative structure. The first thing I looked at was Forrest graduates West Point. So I went to West Point and I researched graduating ceremonies. I looked at speeches given by guests at graduating ceremonies, and I looked at pictures of West Point, and I looked at maps of West Point so that I could plot it all out to be as realistic as possible. And when I do things like this, and I find an image that I want to incorporate into the graphic novel, I send that image to the publisher and say, save this. And the subject of the image is always in the subject line so they can find it easily. For instance, picnic grounds at West Point. That's up above in the subject line. And below is a photo of the picnic lines. This just illustrates many ways in which research shapes a subject. I recently read a book by James Michener. In fact, I read a few excerpts last week. But Michener is most famous for his vast historical novels, which will trace a land and a people from prehistoric times. And when Michener researched these novels, they formed the novels because he was turning history into entertainment. But he was a stickler for accuracy. And everything you read in a Michener novel, you can take to the bank. Michener set a path for himself that required research. And he's written so many of these books, and they're enormous. Centennial is 270,000 words long. I read about 3/4 of it. But then the events in the last quarter of the book weren't as exciting as what preceded, so I set it down. I've also read The Source, which is about the birth of Judaism and Christianity in the Middle East. And I've read Mexico, which I recommend because it's the only Michener novel I've read that has a sense of humor. I've read a couple of others too. And if you want to learn history painlessly, read Michener. And those are just some examples of how research shapes fiction.
All right. Very good. Do you want to call Freddie over?
Freddie, do you have anything to add?
Freddie, do you want to call him over?
Freddie? Where are you, Freddie?
He's just right here.
Oh, now Freddie's thinking. We don't want it.
Freddie's thinking, yeah, right. He's thinking about his next meal. All right. Well, very good. Appreciate all your thoughts on this. And remember to, maybe
Freddie has something to say.
Freddie may come and join us at the end. Okay. Oh, well, there we go. A little cameo by Freddie. It's never complete without a video with Freddie. All right. Thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate it.